Ian Douglas Smith, the former Prime Minister of Rhodesia, was infamously known for saying, "I do not believe in black majority rule ever in Rhodesia, not in 1,000 years." This quotation was common currency before independence in 1980 and soon thereafter. But for the last 3 decades at least, people have forgotten that. They've now remembered another one of his quotations when he was predicting that Zimbabwe, under black majority rule, will face economic challenges like never before. He said that if blacks are to rule themselves, people in towns will be walking on sewage until they believe it's normal. Well, people are walking on sewage. Basic services like roads, hospitals, schools have all but collapsed. The infrastructure that the nation inherited at independence has not even been improved upon in the last 44 years. For instance, on the power generation side of it, Ian Smith left a feasibility study to add 2 units at Wange Power Station, unit number 7 and unit number 8. And they also left feasibility study to build Batoka Gorge. Only last year that this ZANU-PF government finally commissioned Wange Unit 7 and 8. And as we know, as Zimbabweans well know, the country has had serious power shortages for decades. These 2 units are being added 40 years behind schedule. The Smith regime would have built those power stations if it had not been for the Civil War. And ZANU-PF has failed to build them, not because there was no money. God forbid. The country's ruling elite have been spending money these last 44 years hand over fist. People like Mugabe have built their blue roof mansion at a cost of a staggering 3 to 4 billion US dollars. That would have been enough to build Batoka Gorge by Zimbabwe by itself, without having to bother about Zambia contributing. Other ruling elite leaders have also spent fortune on mansions since independence. Money that should have been used to maintain the country's hospitals and schools and roads. It is not. This is the problem that we have had in Zimbabwe. And I think it is good that Zimbabweans have now turned to what Ian Smith was saying, and they're paying attention to it. We should have paid attention to it, if you ask me. When he said it, instead of just dismissing it with the usual, oh, this is just him being a racist. What is it? We've got to ask ourselves now. What is it that Ian Smith saw and was able to predict with such precision that black ruled Zimbabwe will be a failed state? We are a failed state. There can be no denying it. I think one of the reasons why we are a failed state is precisely that Zimbabweans are in the habit of refusing to accept reality. Definitely one of the pointers that would have made people like Ian Smith believe that Zimbabwe will be a failed state, independent Zimbabwe will be a failed state, is our failure to accept when something has gone wrong. We have got a knack for burying our heads in the sand and would not accept that we've made a mistake. It is bad enough that we make the mistake, but we only compound it by refusing to accept that there's been a mistake. I think one of the biggest mistakes we have made is to make our leaders believe that they are somehow special and are infallible. Of course, they are not infallible. And yet, this has become an enduring reality in Zimbabwe. We cannot get out of it. And somehow it has given the leaders themselves the confidence to impose themselves and to put themselves above democratic accountability because they believe they know best. And we have allowed that culture to be ingrained. Nobody is infallible. Leaders should be democratically accountable to the electorate. Making that quantum leap has really been our biggest problem, or one of our biggest problems. We are a failed state because for the last 44 years, we've been stuck with this anarchy of dictatorship, corrupt, incompetent, and tyrannical. And yet we have failed to remove it from office. I think the failure, some people will argue that it is a regime that has used violence to impose itself. That is very true. But one cannot deny that in the last 44 years, there have been many opportunities to end this anarchy of dictatorship. The question then is, Why have we failed to use those opportunities? Some people, even to this day, still do not understand what the GNU was all about. The primary purpose of the 2008 to 2018 Government of National Unity was to implement the democratic reforms to stop ZANU-PF rigging the elections. Morgan Tsvangirai and company failed to implement even one reform. And it has nothing to do with ZANU-PF or Robert Mugabe. Beyond, of course, that Robert Mugabe bribed Tsvangirai and company to forget about the reforms. But the weakness is with those who were bribed. They were easily corrupted. But the other problem also is with us, the electorate, who failed to see what was happening. Even to this day, with the benefit of hindsight, it's shocking that so many Zimbabweans out there still fail to appreciate that the GNU's primary purpose was to implement reforms, and that the MDC leaders sold out by failing to implement even one reform. And that is at the heart of why Zimbabwe is a failed state. That was the golden opportunity to stop ZANU-PF rigging elections, and we wasted it. And we don't even have the competence to realize that the opposition, whose primary purpose, the people of Zimbabwe have risked life and limb and livelihoods these last 24 years to elect these individuals for the primary purpose of implementing reform to stop ZANU-PF rigging elections. And therefore, then, that the opposition should have failed to implement reforms, and we, the people, failed to see that they've sold out, is a serious weakness. There was nothing scientific at all, or rocket science, when Ian Smith said, if blacks are to rule themselves, people in towns will walk on sewage until they believe it's normal. All the gains from colonialism will vanish. Infrastructure will collapse. Roads will be impassable. Trains will kill people until they abandon. They must save modes of transport. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to have seen that was coming. Even if you fail to see it, now that these things are happening, we have got all the benefit of 44 years of hindsight. To fail to see the root cause is the leadership and us, the people themselves, who are failing to accept that the leaders are corrupt and incompetent. The argument that ZANU-PF has used brute force cannot be denied. Indeed, one has got to readily accept it. But like I said, there is a limit to the coercion that ZANU-PF could do. During the GNU, it wasn't the coercion that failed to implement the reforms. It was the opposition's corruption and incompetence. And holding the opposition to account, they have not used any coercion on the people. It is our own incompetence that has allowed us to keep on following leaders, even after they'd shown that they are corrupt, incompetent, and utterly useless. I'm pleased that Zimbabweans are definitely now focusing not so much on Ian Smith's "there will be no majority of rule in Rhodesia for 1,000 years." That was just him talking. That was to be proven that that was nonsense. But what has proven more enduring is his prediction that we are incapable of self-government. And it is this that is the number one issue that we've got to address ourselves now. Now, more urgently than ever before. Some people have said, why are you always talking about reforms? It is the issue. It is the number one issue in Zimbabwe. Until we solve this problem of bad governance, Zimbabwe will continue sinking. We have already had 44 years of rigged elections. And at the present moment, all signs are that ZANU-PF is going to hold the 2028 elections without even one token reform in place. The opposition will participate, will con their supporters to participate, and thus give the regime legitimacy, the ZANU-PF legitimacy. If we fail to stop this insanity of rigged elections, then of course, whether we care to admit it publicly or not is irrelevant. The truth of the matter is Zimbabwe is a failed state because we have failed to govern ourselves. That is the truth. So the number one issue is we must solve this problem of bad governance. And at the heart of it is our failure to hold those in power to account. And our failure to understand the issues. The Greeks, the ancient Greeks were right that democracy only works when the electorate is educated, knowledgeable, and diligent. They are far off the mark. We have got a long way to go if we're ever going to achieve that position. We have been trading on sewage for far too long. We can do something to end it. But that process starts with us, ordinary Zimbabweans, refusing to participate in elections that are so flawed, that we have been warned these elections are so flawed, they will change nothing. And by participating, we only give ZANU-PF legitimacy. And yet we've been conned by the likes of Chamisa to participate, telling us the most idiotic lies one can imagine are plugged or for tricking loopholes. I can't believe it. Even now, still can't believe that people in their millions believe that nonsense. And yet they did. And worse still, some still believe it. If Chamisa was to tell them a similar lie tomorrow, they will participate in the 2028 elections. Such ignorance and naivety is at the heart of why Zimbabwe is a failed state. And we have got to address it. We can't bury our heads in the sand and pretend it's going away. It is tragic. Of course, it is tragic that Zimbabwe is a failed state. But it is something that we can do something about if we want to. And I believe SADC's damning report last year that ZANU-PF rigged the elections opened the door for us to do something about it. If we do not participate in the 2028 elections, then I believe SADC will do the right thing and deny ZANU-PF legitimacy. That will put us back to where we were in 2008 to 2013. And this time, all we've got to do is make sure that we have got competent people in that government of national unity who will implement the reforms and end this case of rigged elections. Meanwhile, we will continue to tread on sewage. The roads will be full of potholes. The hospitals are in a sorry state. Schools, same thing. This nightmare is not going to end until we do something about this issue of bad governance and rigged elections. Thank you very much for joining me today, and have a good day.